Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 true and deeply unsettling stories about growing up in Appalachia. These aren't stories about ghost towns or distant myths. They're about childhood memories that started ordinary and ended with something no one could explain. But before we continue, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and don't forget to like and share. 25, thank you for being here. Now then, let's begin. I know it sounds strange, but in Appalachia, there are things nobody ever explains. They just forbid. And if you ask why, they'll only look at you a little longer than normal. Long enough for you to feel stupid for asking. That summer, I was 12 and staying with my grandparents in a small town tucked beneath the mountains. Their gray wooden house sat in the middle of a cornfield, far from the road, where you couldn't hear anything but crickets and wind. I'd been sent there because my parents were going through a separation. One of those, let's keep the kid out of the mess kind of deals. My grandfather was strict, barely spoke, and took one rule more seriously than anything else: don't go past the fence behind the field after sundown. He didn't repeat it often, but the way he looked when he said it stuck with me. Every evening before the light fully died, he'd walk out to check that rusty wire fence out back. Just a few bent stakes, barely holding together, but he treated it like it marked the edge of a cliff. I used to think he was being dramatic. Then Noah arrived. Noah was my cousin, 4 years younger, in from Charlotte to spend the summer. He was skittish, spoke with a city accent, needed a nightlight to sleep, but was unbelievably curious. He asked me about the fence 5 times in 3 days. Every time I dodged the question, he came back with another version. But what if the sun's only half down? 3, I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I didn't know either. But I had the sense there was something my grandparents knew, something they never said. Once, I overheard my grandfather talking to the town pastor in the kitchen. They didn't know I was standing outside the door. Noah was asleep out back on the porch swing, Granddad said. That place used to be a sick ash pit. Back during the flu. He paused. They dumped the bodies in and lit them. Folks say when it rains at night, the earth breathes up. The pastor only nodded, didn't ask anything. I remember it because my grandfather rarely told stories. And that time, his voice sounded like he wasn't talking to anyone at all. The next morning, Noah said, "Why did I dream about a dirt smell like burnt ashes if I've never smelled it before?" I couldn't answer. I'd started noticing it too when the rain came in. It wasn't normal mud. It felt alive, like something that hadn't been buried properly. That night I couldn't sleep, not from fear, but curiosity. I was 12, old enough to do things grown-ups wouldn't allow. I dug through the drawer for 2 flashlights, a few leftover firecrackers from the 4th, and told Noah we were going out. I remember clearly how the rain started. Light, Appalachian rain, mixed with moss and rust. We wrapped ourselves in thin blankets and crept between the corn until we reached the fence. Noah hesitated. I promised, "We'll just look for a minute, then go back." I still thought I was the older one, the brave one. Past the fence, the land dipped like a shallow bowl. In the middle, there was a sunken patch the size of a dried-up crater. Burnt wood fragments scattered around, and coils of rusted wire lay like veins. Some of it still looked freshly scorched, though Grandpa said nobody touched that ground in years. We lit the firecrackers and joked around, calling each other's names across the rows. Noah laughed every time a fuse popped, curling up next to me when the light flared bright. I shouted, "Noah," to mess with him. He laughed and fake screamed. And then, a voice called back. At first, I thought it was echo, but the timing was off. It dragged out, warped. No, that wasn't me. And it wasn't a human voice. Noah grabbed my arm, trembling. I swept the flashlight around us, but nothing moved. No wind, no bugs, just soft rain, and the smell of living dirt growing stronger, like something twisting under the roots. I tried to stay calm, called down toward the sunken spot, "Is someone there?" No answer. Then, A section of the earth caved in, just a sliver, like something was shifting right beneath the surface. Noah tugged at my hand. "We have to go." His voice was almost a whisper. I looked one last time. There was something retreating into the dark. Fast. Wet. Wrong. Like a human head, but misshapen. Too low. Tilted at an angle that didn't make sense. We ran. I didn't look back. I heard Noah sob once, but he stayed close. We didn't stop until we hit the porch steps. We told no one. No one asked. But that night I dreamed of Grandpa sitting on the edge of that pit, holding his rifle, but too frozen to shoot. His eyes were wide, unblinking, just staring down, like he was waiting for something to come back up. The next morning, I woke up shivering under damp sheets. My head burned, and my skin felt too tight for my body. Grandma pressed a cool rag on my forehead and told me to rest. She didn't ask what happened the night before. I think she already knew. Noah came in after lunch, still in his pajamas, barefoot, whispering like we were hiding from something. "You remember last night?" he asked. "That thing called me." I told him to shut up. I didn't mean to snap, but something about the way he said things made the back of my throat clench. He didn't cry. He just nodded and went back outside. I lay there, sweating, listening to the ticking clock on the wall and the heavy silence of the house. Deep down, I knew we had stepped over something we weren't supposed to. Not just a rule, but a line between what belonged to us and what didn't. That night, I thought Noah had gone to sleep early. Grandma and Grandpa were already in bed. I'd almost drifted off when I heard the creak of the back screen door. I sat up. Noah was standing there with his shoes on, holding both flashlights. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me. Then he whispered, "Come with me, please. I don't want to hear it alone." I should have said no. I was still sick, still scared, but I didn't want to be the one left behind. Outside, the air was thick and quiet. No rain, but the ground was damp, as if it had soaked up something it couldn't hold. The smell hit me right away. Not just mud. It was sour, like wet rags and old breath, like something rotting under floorboards. We didn't talk, just moved through the stalks until we reached the fence. I stepped over first. Noah followed close behind. The light from our flashlights cut thin paths through the corn, but it didn't feel like enough. Then, without warning, both beams flickered and died. I stopped, spun around, arm reaching out. Noah. He was right behind me a second ago. But he's not there. I hear breathing. Short. Fast. Then something dragging. A wet, rhythmic pull. Thump, thump, thump. I whirl around and see his legs being pulled backward, his heels kicking through the grass. Only his eyes visible in the lightless dark, wide open and terrified. I lunge toward him, hand out. My fingers brush against something slick, cold. It feels like soaked leather or the underside of a mushroom. Too smooth. Too wrong. The smell hits me full force. Sour and metallic and old, like rust and livestock, and something that's been burned but still breathing. Then a gunshot cracks the air. A second light swings through the field. Grandpa's flashlight cuts through the fog. He's yelling, "Let him go," and fires again. The thing lets out a sound, somewhere between a shriek and a deep rattle. Not human, not animal. It yanks itself back into the dark like a root being ripped from wet soil. Grandpa throws the rifle aside and charges after it. I freeze. My knees collapse. Noah curls into himself beside me, shaking, fists clenched tight. Grandpa never comes back. The next morning, the house felt wrong. Still, hollow. I found Grandma sitting at the kitchen table, hands clasped, eyes red but dry. She hadn't changed clothes. The stove was cold. She hadn't slept. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. Around mid-morning, she called the sheriff. They walked the field, found the broken fence. Nothing else. No tracks. No sign of blood. No sign of Grandpa. By sundown, folks from the church came with dogs and flashlights. The pastor arrived too. No one said the word dead, but I heard someone ask if a burial prayer could be said without a body. Grandma didn't answer. The search lasted 2 days. They found 2 shell casings near the pit and a torn piece of Grandpa's flannel shirt caught on a tall, dry stalk. It hung higher than any of us could reach. There was no wind that day. After that, nobody went near the fence. No tape, no marker, just silence. Like they all agreed without speaking that whatever happened didn't belong to the world we could touch. I never crossed that field again. I never dared. When it rains at night, I still smell it. The rot, the ash, the damp, hungry earth. Noah stopped speaking much after that. He never mentioned Grandpa again. But sometimes I'd catch him standing by the window, watching the field like he expected something to come back. And I still see Grandpa's face in my mind. The second before he ran into the corn. Not afraid, just full of something heavier. Like sorrow. Like he knew exactly what he was running toward. And that it had waited long enough. I used to think grown-ups knew everything. That there was a reason behind every rule. And they followed them because they understood. But now I know better. They were just closing their eyes to something they didn't dare name. When I was 10, I lived in a village pressed between 2 ridges of greenish rock. We had 1 road in and 1 road out, and even that one vanished each spring under floodwater. There was a place beyond the last garden, where the wind whistled loud enough to shake your teeth. The grown-ups called it the breathing mouth. From the time we could walk, we were told, never go into the breathing mouth without red thread on your wrist. It wasn't a game. Kids who forgot got smacked. And every year, before winter ended, there was the guiding rite. 2 children of the same age, tied with red thread, would walk into the gap, touch the far wall, and return. To change the year's breath. 2-5. That winter, I was chosen, along with Evie. She had just moved in, a tiny thing with wide eyes and city shoes, always asking questions and giggling at the answers. I didn't know her well, but I remember my stomach dropping when the elder called our names. Everyone was there. My mother held my coat tighter around my shoulders, her mouth pulled into a line. There was no choice. They tied a red thread around each of our left wrists, loops tight, then a knot I couldn't undo. The village healer touched our foreheads, muttering something too soft to catch. I felt nothing holy in it, only the weight of a room holding its breath. Right before we stepped past the outer stones, the old gatekeeper leaned down and whispered, "Don't speak each other's names in there." Her breath smelled like mint and smoke. I turned to Evie, but she just rolled her eyes. "They say stuff like that to scare us," she whispered. "It's just rocks." 25, the entrance sucked in wind like a mouth. Cold and wet. My ears popped. The walls closed in fast, and we had to turn sideways after 10 steps. There was no smell of earth, just stone dust and something burnt and stale, like an old hearth gone cold. We followed the flicker of the oil lamp ahead of us. It swung from a hook nailed into the wall, steady enough for now. Evie walked just behind me, the thread between us brushing my hand. We didn't talk. The air in there made you feel like whispering would echo forever. At the far end, the tunnel opened just wide enough to let us both stand. There was a flat wall where the rock changed color, and we each placed a marked stone there, just like we were taught. It was supposed to seal the path for the year, to lock the wind in place. I didn't understand it. I just did what they said. We turned to go back. But halfway through, the light went out. The oil hissed. And then we were in complete black. I stopped breathing. I felt Evie grab my hand hard. "Don't leave me," she whispered. Her voice trembled like it was hanging over a hole. I squeezed her hand. "I won't. I'm here." 25, but her skin was cold. Not just cold like fear. Cold like stone. Cold like something that had been waiting in the dark for a long time. "Evie," "Are you okay?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just stepped closer, pressed her shoulder against mine. I fumbled for the match in my pocket. My fingers shook as I struck it. A thin spark, then a brief flame. In that flicker, I saw her wrist. The thread was gone. In its place was something rough and dark. A twisted band like dead grass, blackened and frayed. My breath caught. I let go. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't speak. I bolted through the dark, scraping my shoulders on the narrow walls, choking on wind and dust. When I burst into the open, gasping, the whole village was there. And Evie. Evie was already standing at the mouth of the tunnel, shivering, with no thread on her wrist. She looked at me like she'd been alone the whole time, like I had never been with her in the dark at all. The adults didn't ask questions. They wrapped us in blankets and brought us warm broth, touching our heads like we'd passed a test. Someone whispered, "She came back. That's all that matters." But I said it aloud. I said I had just been with Evie, not the real one, not the one outside. My mother's hand tightened around mine. She didn't speak. Her fingers trembled once, then held still. That was the only sign I got that she believed me. That night, Evie didn't sleep. She sat by the window in our room, knees pulled to her chest, eyes locked on the dark hills. I lay awake, pretending to be asleep. Just before dawn, I heard her whisper something to herself. A soft breath against the glass. It knows my name now. 25. We didn't talk about it after that. Not in school. Not during chores. When our parents sent us to gather kindling or wash clothes, we went without speaking. But I felt it growing between us. A tautness, like the thread that used to be there still tugged, just invisible now. A week passed. The snow melted into mud. The village settled back into its slow rhythm. People nodded at us like we had done something good, something ancient and brave. I started to think maybe it really was over. Maybe the thing in the tunnel had let us go. But in my dreams, it hadn't. Every night I found myself back inside the cold rock, pulled forward by something I couldn't see. My hands were tied together by red thread that burned when I tried to pull away. Somewhere behind me, feet scraped against stone, slow and uneven. And always, just behind my ear, a voice whispering, only one. 25. One evening near the end of winter, I woke to a sound outside, a soft padding, like small feet on snow. I crept to the window and lifted the curtain. Evie was outside, barefoot, walking toward the breathing mouth. I grabbed my coat and followed. She didn't look back. Her arms hung limp at her sides. The trees didn't move. The whole world felt held in one breath. When I reached the cave, she stopped, turned. Her eyes met mine, but they were blank. Not frightened, not confused, just empty, like the girl inside had already gone. Then she turned and walked into the dark. I called her name. My voice vanished into the rock. No echo, no answer. The next morning, the adults said maybe she had gone back to the town she came from. Maybe she missed her old home. Nobody searched. Nobody wept. But I saw it. On the fence post at the village edge, a red thread tied in a tight knot. Not the way they'd taught us to tie it. This one was wrong. Bent back over itself. Like someone had done it with hands that no longer remembered how. I grew up in another place. A town with paved roads and yellow streetlights. I told myself it was just a strange tradition, something I had misunderstood. But every year, as winter ends, I tie a red thread around my left wrist, not because I believe in the right, but because I know, if I don't, it will think I am ready to lead the way again. Before we step into the next story, if you're still here, still listening, with the lights low, maybe drop a comment. Just tell me where you're listening from. It helps more than you know. All right, let's keep going. Every adult in my town knew about the old clinic, but they never mentioned it when kids were in the room. So, Like everything hidden, it became an obsession. I grew up in a small village near the Boone Forest line. The old clinic sat just past the last row of houses, a half-mile out, swallowed by vines and moss. It had 3 long wings, a front office, a birthing hall, and a low, narrow recovery unit that everyone called the quiet wing. That was the part they warned us about, the part where they used to keep the ones who couldn't leave. The grown-ups said it closed down in 1983 because of mold. But we knew better. We knew that when the rain soaked in just right, the kind of Appalachian rain that rises from the ground instead of falling from the sky, a pale yellow light would glow behind the window of room 2. There were 3 of us that year, me, Tyrell, and Isaac. We talked about it constantly, drew the layout in our notebooks, dared each other after school. Tyrell was the loud one, always joking, always first to kick a door. Isaac barely spoke, but when he did, if you listened, I wasn't scared, just curious. I wanted to understand why the grown-ups looked at that place like it could call them by name. It happened in October, one of those days where the clouds sit low and the trees go quiet before the first frost. We were at a school campout when the rain started, steady and warm, the kind that seeped into your shoes from underneath. We slipped away after dinner, with flashlights, a pack of sour candy, and a pen to write our names if we found anything worth claiming. The back wing's door opened too easily. The metal handle was ice cold, like touching a stone that had been buried deep. Inside, the smell hit first, sharp, sour, like old bleach mixed with wet wood. Our flashlights bounced off peeling walls, casting shapes that didn't match anything real. Isaac pointed toward room 2. Its door was shut, still had a padlock hanging loose on the handle, but nothing held it in place. From inside, we heard the sound, a slow scrape, like metal on tile, the sound of a bed frame dragging. Tyrell grinned. Somebody's having a late nap. He walked ahead, hand out like he was about to knock. I reached for the doorknob. Before I could touch it, it turned by itself. The door opens into darkness. It feels different here. The air is thicker, damp. The floor under my shoes is cold, not like tile but earth, like something living. I step in first. The room is small, no windows, just a shape in the far corner, a rusted iron bed, mattress split open, springs poking out like broken ribs. There is something on it. I hear it breathing, soft, shaky, like someone asleep but dreaming hard. Isaac lifts his flashlight. The bed is empty, but I swear, I hear something inhale, deep and slow, right behind my ear. I tell them we should go, but Tyrell laughs, strides into the room, and slaps the edge of the bed frame. This thing still works. Bet someone's gonna need it tonight. Then it comes. A voice, not from us, not a whisper. It rolls off the walls, low and bent. Someone's gonna need it tonight. The words are the same, but the voice is wrong. Offbeat, off-key, like someone learning how to speak by mimicking sound. We don't argue. We run. Isaac stumbles at the hallway turn. I grab his arm and haul him upright. The door to room 2 is closed again by the time I look back. No wind. No movement. Just shut. I started sleeping with the bathroom light on. At first, it was just to feel normal again. But some nights I'd wake up and swear I heard something just beyond the wall. Not rats. Not branches. Breathing. One time, I stayed up past midnight, dared myself to look in the mirror. Just stand there. Wait. I must have stood for 10 minutes, not blinking. Then, I saw it, a shadow behind my left shoulder, where there was nothing. I spun around, no one there. But the shape stayed with me after that. Not in the room, but in my thoughts, like it had found its way in. At school, Tyrell started looking worse. He still laughed too loud, still told the ghost story, but his hands shook when he wasn't thinking. Once he said, Maybe something did follow us. Then he laughed like it was a joke, but didn't meet my eyes. I caught Isaac in the hallway one afternoon. He was picking at the skin around his fingernails until they bled. I asked if he was okay. He said, "I never heard it breathe out. Did you?" Then he walked off. That night I dreamed again. Same bed, same room. But this time, it was colder. I could see my breath, and I wasn't alone. I couldn't move my head, but I felt fingers press into my collarbone. Then a second hand, gently sliding something under my neck. Metal, curved, tightening. I tried to scream. The figure leaned down. I never saw its face. Just a blur, like heat rising off asphalt. It whispered, "You came back. Good." I woke up on the floor again. This time, not under my bed. In the hallway, my bedroom door was still closed, and the bruise around my neck had darkened. Tyrell stopped coming to school. His mom said it was the flu, but I overheard the nurse say he'd started speaking in a different voice. Low, flat, almost like he was reading from a script. The principal said it was probably exhaustion. No one wanted to talk about it after that. Isaac moved by spring. No goodbye. I stayed, but I kept the string. It sits in a box under my dresser even now, coiled, stiff, stained with something I've never tried to clean. I told myself for years that it was just a night we got scared, that the room had nothing in it, that maybe we imagined the sound. But I know what I heard, and what I keep hearing. Sometimes, when I pass hospital doors left cracked open, or when the light in a hallway flickers and there's no wind. That sound, soft, rhythmic, familiar. The sound of a bed frame, dragging. I'm 30 now, but this happened when I was 10. The summer my uncle died and the mountains burned. They said he died a hero, trying to stop the fire before it reached the ridge. Said he was last seen heading into the line with an axe and a radio. But no one was there that night. No one except me. I never told anyone. Not because I was scared, but because I figured if I ever said it out loud, whatever it was might realize I still remembered. That summer, my mom sent me up to stay with my grandparents. My dad had died that spring and she needed space. Or maybe she needed silence. My Uncle Reese was already living there. He was my dad's younger brother, 35, quiet, worked as a volunteer firefighter. I liked him. He had that kind of stillness that made you feel safe just being near him. And he didn't talk down to me like other adults. He'd say things like, "Just because you're small doesn't mean you can't be trusted." I believed him. When the forest fires started moving down from the north edge of Avery County, the town began packing up. The school closed early. Families left in pickup trucks with tarps tied over boxes of clothes and jars of preserves. But Uncle Reese stayed. He said he was part of the watch team. Said he was there to look after the land. I asked him what that meant. He just looked at the trees and said, "As long as the air doesn't smell like fire, it hasn't really arrived." That made sense to me, in the way most things do when you're 10 and want to believe grown-ups know what they're doing. But then one night, I smelled smoke. It wasn't coming from the hills. It wasn't coming from the tree line. It came from the backyard. I got out of bed, crept to the window, and saw an orange flicker behind the barn. It wasn't a steady light like fire. It pulsed, like breathing, but nothing looked like it was burning. Uncle Reese had already been acting strange. He'd started sleeping in his fire gear. Boots lined up by the door. Helmet always nearby. Some nights I found him standing out on the porch, staring toward the trees, whispering under his breath like he was answering questions no one asked. I once caught him in the cornrows, crouched down, whispering. I couldn't hear the words, just the shape of them. Then came the night I followed him. He stepped out past the barn around midnight, axe slung over one shoulder, jacket already zipped. I didn't call after him. I just waited a minute, then slipped on my sneakers and went after him. The grass was wet with dew and ash. The hills were quiet, too quiet. Like everything had stopped listening. I stayed low behind the fence, watching him walk out to the clearing where the compost piles used to be. That's when I saw it. He wasn't alone. Across from him stood someone, or something, in a long coat that shimmered orange and gold, like sunlight on moving water. There was no flame, but the coat glowed like it held fire inside. I couldn't see a face, just light coming off its back. And Uncle Reese wasn't scared. He stood still, no tension in his shoulders, like he'd been waiting. I took a step back and snapped a branch. The thing turned, not all at once, but wrong. Its head turned first. Then the shoulders caught up. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the porch. My lungs hurt. My hands shook. I waited for him to come back. He came in an hour later, pale and soaked in sweat. I asked, "Who was that out there?" He looked at me like he didn't want to answer. Then he said, "It called your name. Kid, you might want to keep quiet for a while." In the morning, he didn't eat breakfast. Just packed his axe and filled a canteen. Told Grandma he had to check the lower trail before the next wind shift. Told me not to go past the back fence, no matter what. I nodded, but I knew he wasn't planning on coming back. I waited 10 minutes after he left. Maybe less. Long enough for the sound of his boots to fade, but not long enough for my chest to stop hurting. I grabbed my flashlight and followed, staying close to the edges of the field, heart pounding like I was doing something wrong, but knowing I had to. The dew hadn't dried yet, and I could see the imprint of his boots in the tall grass, leading into the rows past the fence and down toward the lower slope where the trees opened wide. The sky was still a dark blue, not quite morning, but already thick with smoke. I couldn't see flames, but the light was different. Too orange, too soft. I followed the trail until I reached the place where the dry grass met the scorched earth. The ground felt hot through my shoes. I started to hear it. A tapping sound. Not fast. Not random. 3 sharp knocks. A pause. Then again. Like metal on metal. Like an axe tapping the side of a gas tank. I crouched low behind a half-burnt stump and listened. Then I heard my name. Not loud. Not whispered. Just placed. It was my uncle's voice, but it came from everywhere, like it had no mouth to travel from. I stood up. Uncle Reese. The tapping stopped. The wind dropped out of the trees. And then the fire started. Not a slow build. A burst. A line of flame lit up across the ridge, and the trees bent like something had shoved them all at once. I turned to run, but my feet stuck. Not trapped, just rooted, because something in me didn't want to move. I was waiting for him to call again. He never did. The next day, the rescue crews found the burn site. It was small, controlled, strange. There was no path where the fire had come in, and no trail where it had spread out. Just one circle of black, about 20 feet across, like a stamp pressed into the forest. In the center was Uncle Reese's jacket, folded. Next to it, his helmet, turned upside down, both clean. No burns, no soot, no sign of him, no bones, no blood. They said maybe he'd gotten caught in a crown fire, that he'd burned so hot there was nothing left. But I was there. I saw the edge of that circle. My footprints ringed it. I'd walked around it, again and again, like I was trying to draw a line between me and what was inside. They called him a hero, printed his name in the paper, said he gave his life to stop the fire from spreading. But I know the truth. He didn't go in to stop anything. He went because he thought someone was waiting. And he was right. I moved to another state when I got older, became a paramedic, learned how to run into danger the right way. But to this day, if I see a fire jacket hanging loose on a hook, or smell cedar smoke in the wind, I turn away. Because that night, what I saw behind the barn wasn't fire. It was a voice, dressed in light, and it knew my name. I never told my mother about that night. Not because I thought she would get angry, but because I didn't want to say out loud what I left behind in that field. There are things that live longer when you name them. That night, I heard my name spoken by something that wasn't supposed to know it. My name is Mara. I'm 32 now. But this happened when I was 9. We lived near the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains, in a house where the backyard backed right up against cornfields and fog. That evening, a storm rolled in, so fast the sky turned green before it ever turned gray. After dinner, Mom asked me and Hannah to take out the garbage, not just to the bin by the road, but down the muddy service trail that curved behind the cornfield, toward the compost heap near the edge of the old well. It was something we did once a week, usually quick, usually safe. But the rain had come hard that day, the kind that soaks the ground from underneath and makes every step feel like it wants to keep you. We brought the big push cart with the metal wheels and the squeaky left side. Hannah always hated that cart. She said it sounded like it had a limp. The rain had stopped, but the mist hung low, and everything smelled like wet stalks and iron-rich soil. It was heavy in the air, like you could taste it. We got halfway down the path when the wheels started to stick. Not a little. The kind of stick where you feel the mud give a little grunt when it lets go. Then I heard it. A sound from the corn. Not loud, not even close. Just thin, like it had been carried a long way. Mara. I stopped. Hannah kept walking. Didn't hear it. I turned toward the rows. They didn't move. The corn was tall, damp, shining. I couldn't see between the stalks. I said nothing, just kept walking. We should go back fast, I told Hannah. She didn't argue. We pushed harder, but the wheels only got worse. The mud swallowed deeper with each yard. I looked down and saw one side of the cart already sinking almost to the axle. The air got colder. My shirt stuck to my arms. Hannah panted beside me. Then the voice came again. Mara, Mara, this time clearer. Hannah froze. She looked at me. Did you hear that? I nodded. Run, she whispered. I pushed. Hard. We were moving faster. But the cart dragged behind like it wanted to stay. My hands slipped on the metal bar. My shoes filled with mud. Then the cart lurched, tilted, and stopped. I looked down. One wheel had sunk deep into a pocket of sludge, and there, just to the side of the track, were prints. Not ours. Not made by rubber soles. Not in a straight line. They curved away into the corn, dragging slightly, like someone had tried to walk but kept sliding sideways. I grabbed Hannah's arm. Wait. There's someone back there. She bit her lip. We shouldn't go in. I stepped forward anyway. My flashlight flickered, but I kept walking. Just 3 steps into the stalks. And then I saw it. A small figure, moving backward. No face. No voice. Just the outline of a head and a shoulder, slipping behind the rows. Too smooth to be walking. A cap, tilted wrong, like it had slid off someone's head and stayed floating. Hannah screamed. I turned. My foot struck the old board lying in the mud. The cart shifted, sank. I reached back to grab her hand. I'll come right back. I promise. Then I ran. I didn't turn around, not even when she shouted after me. Mara, wait. Her voice cracked, but I didn't look back. When I reached the house, my breath was gone and my shoes felt twice as heavy. Mom was already at the door, worried, asking why I came back without the cart. I told her the wheel had sunk and that I thought I saw someone in the rows. She looked past me toward the field, then said quietly, "Tomorrow we'll ask Mr. Benton to help pull it out." I wanted to tell her more. I wanted to say Hannah was still out there, that something had called my name from the corn. But the words stuck like mud in my throat. Mom kept smoothing my hair like she was trying not to hear what I wasn't saying. I tried to sleep. I really did. But around midnight, a sound rolled up the wall of our house, a low grind, like a wheel trying to pull through thick mud. Not the creak of the old bin, not the neighbor's truck. A slow, dragging roll. I sat up, breathing through my mouth. The sound moved past my window, stopped, then shifted again as if someone was testing the ground. When I finally got the courage to peek outside, there was nothing. Just the shine of wet soil and the dark mouth of the cornfield. Hannah didn't come to school the next morning. No call. No note on the board. The teacher said her mom kept her home because she was tired from the storm. I didn't ask anything. If I did, it meant I had to explain the part I couldn't explain. For a few days, life pretended to go back to normal. The air warmed. The mud settled. The path dried in patches. Mom even said, "Everything's calmer now." I nodded, but I didn't believe it. One afternoon, she asked me to bring out a bag of scraps. I told myself I was brave. I told myself I was older. I grabbed the empty cart, pushed it to the edge of the yard, and forced myself to look down that long track again. Fresh tire marks. One set, and they went straight into the corn, not across the path, not turning around. Straight in. I backed away without thinking. My shoulders hit the fence, and I dropped the cart handle. That night, I closed my curtains early, even before dust settled. But the sound followed me into sleep. Mara. Thin, breathless, as if carried by someone who had been running for miles. A week later, I convinced myself to go back for the cart with Hannah. She had finally returned to school, pale and quiet. She barely spoke, but when I asked if she would come, she nodded. Maybe she wanted answers too. The sky was turning the color of copper when we reached the row. The stalks leaned in from both sides, heavy with moisture. The path still held faint tracks from where the mud had swallowed the wheels. I felt them pull at my eyes, like they wanted me to remember every inch of that night. We stepped between the rows. Hannah walked ahead, arms close to her chest. My flashlight cut through the stalks in thin, shaky beams. I tried to tell myself we were only here to find footprints or maybe an animal trail. But the silence felt wrong. Held. The wheel slid first. It yanked the cart sideways and threw Hannah off balance. She fell with a soft gasp, palms sinking into the mud. I bent down to help her up, brushing dirt off her sleeve. When I stood, she was gone. The space beside me was empty. I spun around. Hannah. Nothing answered. I raised the flashlight higher, sweeping the beam through the rows. My breath hitched when I saw her. She was standing far down the path, still as a post, facing me. Her face was pale in the dim light, her eyes wide and glassed over, her mouth open but silent, as if someone had stolen the sound from her before she could scream. I took a step toward her. The ground gave under my foot. The mud folded inward, dragging my shoe. I fell forward, catching myself with both hands. The earth felt warm beneath the surface, like something had been moving there not long ago. Then I heard it, a soft rustle behind me. Not the wind, not the shift of stalks. Closer. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I felt the weight of a hand settle on my shoulder. Small, cold, pulling. I whispered, "Hannah." But the fingers tightened. I forced my hand up, flicked the flashlight on full. The pressure vanished. No one stood behind me. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward where I had seen Hannah. My heartbeat drowned out everything but the slap of mud under my shoes. When I reached the clearing near the fence, she was there, shaking, tears streaking the dirt on her face. Behind her, deep in the rows, a small figure slid out of sight like it had never been solid in the first place. I grabbed her and we ran until my chest burned and my knees felt hollow. When we reached the yard lights, we didn't stop running, not until our houses split at the old mailbox. Hannah moved away at the end of that summer. Her mother said the mountains weren't good for her nerves. She never answered my letters. Not one. I stayed, grew up, learned to keep my distance from wet cornfields and soft ground. But some things outlive childhood. Even now, when it rains hard enough to soak the dirt straight through, I feel it again. That shift in the air, that slow weight behind me. And sometimes, when I'm alone on a quiet road, I hear it rising behind the sound of my own footsteps. Mara. Not loud. Just enough to make me walk faster. Just enough to remind me that I had run once before, and that I never turned back. I came back to the mountain house this fall. I am 33 now. The windows are soft around the edges, and the porch groans when you step wrong. But the old grain shed still stands like nothing ever touched it. Still sealed. Still silent. Just like the last day we closed it. I never told my mother what I heard in there. Not the breathing. Not the voice. Because if I did, she would cry like she did that day. And I was afraid that maybe, just maybe, I locked something in that was never meant to be shut away. I was 12 that year. We lived with my grandparents on a small piece of land carved out between two ridges. The trees wrapped around our fields like a tall fence. Always rustling, even when there was no wind. There was a wooden grain shed out back. Older than the barn. Older maybe than the house itself. Mom used to say it held the breath of dead autumns. She worked the end-of-season threshing job. One of the last people still using the hand-fed cutter machine we kept out in that shed. It had been passed down from some great-uncle and only worked if you hit it just right. The machine smelled like oil and rust. Like something that only remembered movement because of habit. The shed always gave me the chills. The boards creaked in a way that didn't match the weather, and the air inside felt thicker than it should have. I remember standing at the doorway once, watching my mom feed dried stalks into the cutter, the light from the oil lamp painting long shadows against the splintered walls. That day, she said, never open the grain shed when the rain's coming. The wind pulls things out of the trees when it knows you're listening. I thought it was just her way of keeping me out. But kids want to be useful. I wanted her to see I wasn't just a shadow in the doorway. So, one afternoon, when she was gone to town and the sky turned the color of wet ash, I crept out with the old keys. The padlock groaned when I turned it, like it had grown used to being untouched. The hinges squealed when I pulled the door open. Inside, everything smelled like wet straw and old wood. The air was cold, not fall cold, but breath on your neck cold. The cutter machine sat in the corner like a sleeping animal, covered in a brown tarp. I lifted it. Metal parts glinted in the gray light. I touched one of the levers and it moved. Just a little. My fingers tingled. The dust shifted under my feet. Then I heard it. Not loud. Not even close. Just the faintest tick. Then another, like something mechanical trying to remember its purpose. I turned. The door was still open. Nothing behind me, but the sound came again. This time followed by a soft, uneven rattle. And something else. Quieter, but closer. A whisper. Maybe, or breath. Long and thin, like someone sighing through old fabric. I froze. My hand found the flashlight in my coat. I flicked it on, and the beam shook as badly as my fingers. Then it lands on something. A shape on the top shelf. Small, still, a child-height figure hunched low, head bent, hands clasped like it had been waiting. I inhale. The light blinks. Gone. Empty shelf. Nothing there. I ran. I made it out of the shed just as my mother came up the trail with my grandfather. She looked at me like she already knew. What happened? I said, I tried the machine. Just wanted to see if I could help. She didn't speak. Just looked past me. Into the dark opening of the shed. She locked it that night. Said nothing. But when I went to bed, I could still smell the inside of that place. The mix of chaff and cold and something older than both. Something that had waited for a long time, and breathed just loud enough for only me to hear. The next morning, my mother told me not to go near the shed again. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook when she folded the dish towel. I nodded, pretending I did not see. But inside me, something stayed open. Like the shed had pressed a mark on my thoughts that would not fade. That night, I woke to a sound like cloth rubbing against wood. Slow, careful, then a faint metallic click, as if the old cutter was shifting its weight. I sat up in bed and stared toward the window. The shed was out there, just past the trees, hidden in the dark. I told myself it was wind, maybe a branch, maybe the roof settling after a long day of sun and shadow. But then I heard it again, a long breath, drawn in and held, like the shed itself was waiting for someone to answer back. The next day passed like nothing had happened. I helped sweep the porch, ate dinner without a word. But that evening, after my grandparents had gone to bed and the sky dipped low with fog, I walked toward the shed again. The lock was still in place, but the air around it felt warm, like the wood had been breathing. I turned to go back. My foot caught on something, an old length of cord, trailing from the wall. I slipped. The dirt rushed up fast. I landed hard, elbows jarring. Inside the shed, something creaked, then stopped. I scrambled to my feet and ran. The next morning, my mother stood by the shed, eyes scanning every board. "You all right?" I said yes. I was lying. She placed her hand on the doorframe. "From now on," she said, "this place stays closed. Nothing needs to come in or out." She nailed the lock shut. No words after that. For a while, it seemed like the right thing. I stopped dreaming about it. The nights were quieter. The sound of the cutter faded from memory. For a while, everything held still. A year later, we sold the land. Mom said we needed something smaller, something closer to town. I didn't argue, but before we left, I snuck back out to the shed one last time, just to look, just to say goodbye. The lock was rusted but intact. I tugged the door open. It stuck, then gave way with a sigh. Inside, the light was dim. The cutter stood exactly where it had always been. But something was different. It was humming, soft, mechanical, just enough to feel not here. I stepped inside. The air was cold again, that same unnatural chill that made your teeth ache. The floor was dusted with chaff, just like before. But then I saw the prints, small, even, leading from the corner toward the center of the shed. Not mine, not my mother's. And on the shelf, the top one, far back, a black handprint, not painted, not stained, a burn mark, 5 long fingers pressed deep into the wood. I backed out without thinking, and I never looked back. I live far from that house now. I never took up farming, never used another cutter machine. But sometimes, when I hear a low motor spinning at night, something deep in me freezes. And when I see old wire cord curled behind a shed or the edge of a tarp catching light the wrong way, I remember that breath. Not mine, not my mother's. The breath of something waiting in the grain dust, and the mistake I made thinking I was the first to open the door. That one hit a little different. If these stories mean something to you, leave a like, subscribe, or share this video with someone who'd stay up to hear it too. And if you've got a true horror story of your own, my email's in the description. Now, story 6. I never told anyone about that summer. Not because I was afraid they would call me crazy, but because I knew the moment I spoke it aloud, the silver hook would drop again, and the big fish would rise to look at me. I am 29 now, living in the city, but every time I close my eyes too long, I hear the ripple, that sharp rop when something breaks the surface, and Logan's laugh echoing across the shallows. I was 11 that year. The drought had sunk the lake near our town down nearly 2 feet, and the kids called it V Lake because from the hill, it curved like a crooked check mark. A shallow pool on one side, deeper channel cutting down the middle. Logan and I spent most of that summer out there with old rods and sour bait. Mine was a silver-handled rod my dad left behind when he left us. It was the only thing of his I still used. Logan didn't have a rod. He borrowed a stick or fished with line by hand. I never said it out loud, but I liked that I had something he didn't. I thought if I caught the biggest fish in that lake, it would mean something, like proof that I was still worth something, even if my dad had left. The adults told us not to fish in the deep middle. said it was full of slick roots and rock faces, and the drop-off was steeper than it looked. But that made it even more tempting. Logan laughed and said, "Bet all the big ones are down there anyway." I nodded like I agreed, but I had already made up my mind. One hot afternoon, while Logan was chewing sunflower seeds and skipping rocks, I cast my silver rod right into the deepest point of the V. The line dropped fast. I felt it tap the bottom. Then it yanked. The whole rod bent like someone had grabbed the line and run. I shouted, planted my feet, pulled with both hands. But it was too much. The rod cracked just above the reel. My hand slipped. The hook and line snapped away, and the rod spun into the water, sucked down in seconds. I scrambled after it, barefoot, sliding on the mud. The water was colder than I expected. Logan shouted, "Get out! Get out!" But I was already chest deep, swiping at nothing. Then I saw it. Just for a second, something moved beneath me, longer than me, thicker than my leg. Not sleek like a fish should be, but wide, slow, curved like it was watching me from below. I got out, shaking, and the silver rod was gone. Logan teased me all the way home, said I had probably hooked a turtle, said I panicked too easy. I laughed with him, but my stomach twisted the whole time. I said, "That thing pulled the rod right out of my hands." He said, "Sure it did." The next day, I said I had chores, but I went back alone in the late afternoon. The lake was still, lower than the day before. I stood at the edge and looked down into the deep part. The light shimmered just right, and I could see my reflection. Long, thin, bending with the ripples. But it wasn't quite me. The shape was off. The tail end of it moved. I stepped back. There was a sharp rub. Nothing broke the surface. But something had moved. I left. I didn't tell Logan. I didn't even go near the lake the next day. But I thought about it all night. About the rod, about the weight of the pull, and what it meant to leave something behind that was once mine. That night, I made a decision. I would go back. Alone. I waited until everyone was asleep, packed a small flashlight, an old line of bait, and walked out barefoot through the dry weeds behind the field. The night was warm and quiet. Even the insects held their breath. When I reached the lake, it looked different. Not just darker, heavier, like the water itself was awake. The surface was flat, too flat, like glass pulled tight across something that wanted out. I found the same spot where the rod had slipped under. The moonlight touched the ripples just enough for me to see the edge. I tied a line around a stick, dropped the bait. Nothing bit, but the line started moving anyway. Not pulled, shifted, as if being guided. I held tight. Then it jerked. Hard. The stick snapped and the line disappeared into the deep. I turned the flashlight on. The beam cut through the water just long enough to catch it. A mouth. Wide. Pale. Eyes open too wide for something that lived in the dark. It rose, just below the surface. Not breaking it, but close enough that I saw the glint of metal caught in its jaw. My silver hook. Still there. I dropped the light and ran. The next morning, I stayed in bed. Logan knocked. Said, "You giving up for real?" I told him I was sick. That was not a lie. For a few days, I avoided the lake. But every evening, as the sun dipped low and the frogs went silent, I heard it again. The rop. Always just once. Always when I was alone. I started hearing it in dreams. The sound of something surfacing, looking for what it had been given. Then it rained. Hard. For a week, the lake rose again, cool and high and new. Logan and I went back after the storm. He wanted to try a new bait trick. I wanted to believe the thing was gone. The first few hours were normal. Small fish, laughter. I almost forgot. Then Logan cast far, and his line caught something. He grinned, tugged, said, "This one's heavy." His feet slid. He braced. The line kept pulling. I reached to help, but as I touched his shoulder, something pulled hard enough to drag him to his knees. I saw the flash in the water, that same shape, that same eye, open, fixed on us. I screamed. Logan let go. The line snapped. We both stumbled back, breathing hard. Water slapped the shore like hands clapping in slow rhythm. Fall came early that year. One morning, Logan and I went down again. Not to fish, just to walk. The lake had receded. A patch of dry shore opened where the V dipped lowest. We stood at the edge and looked. There, just below the surface, half buried in silt, lay the silver rod, still intact, still glinting. But neither of us moved. Neither of us reached in. Logan said, "You want it back?" I shook my head. No, and I meant it. I kept that summer quiet, buried in stories we never told. I still have the rod, though. My uncle found it the next spring, tangled in driftwood. He gave it back like it was nothing. But I never used it again. I still go fishing now and then, with kids, with friends, but never in lakes shaped like letters, and never when the water is too still. Because sometimes, even now, when the bait dips just a little too smooth and the line stretches without pulling, I feel it, the weight, the envy, and the thing that rose for it, not because it was hungry, but because I was. The old man who watched over the cemetery once told me, "If you ever hear the bell ring when no one's there, do not answer with a bell of your own." I thought he was just trying to scare kids like me. I laughed. But now I understand. Whatever stays awake with the bell does not sleep. I was 12 that summer, living near the town of Claypool, right where the mountain curves in on itself. There was an abandoned chapel tucked into the woods behind the cemetery. It had no windows left and the roof sagged. But the bell tower still stood. And the bell, black iron, thick, with a frayed rope, still hung in place. People in town used to say, if someone rings that bell at midnight, they call the night keeper. Supposedly, he comes to collect the names of the forgotten. The kind of story old folks say like it's half joke, half memory. We were kids, and that made it a dare. So I took the challenge. It was me, Caleb, and Rick. We snuck out that night with a flashlight and a can of soda between us. Walked the trail through the woods with our shoes soaked from dew. It was hot, but still, the kind of thick silence that makes you whisper without knowing why. We reached the chapel at 11:50. The tower looked taller in the dark, older. The rope hung low from the belfry like it was waiting. I climbed the side steps, boots knocking on soft wood. The first pull was too weak. Nothing happened. The second time, I gripped hard. Boong. The sound rolled like thunder through the trees. Deep. Wrong. Rick screamed and bolted. Caleb did not even wait. They vanished back down the trail like a pair of deer. I grinned. I felt proud, for some reason. Then I jumped down and ran after them. But halfway through the woods, I heard the bell ring again. I froze. The sound did not echo the same. It sounded closer, not from behind me, but above. I turned in circles under the canopy. It's just wind, I said to myself. Just leftover swing. Still, I ran faster. Next morning, the three of us met again behind the schoolyard. Rick laughed about it. Caleb said, "You looked like you wet yourself." I forced a laugh. But when we talked about the second ring, they both said they had not heard it. I went back to the chapel that afternoon, alone. The door creaked. Dust hung in the air. The bell rope was no longer inside the tower. It had snapped clean off, and now hung like a loose noose from one of the rafters. The bell was still. But that night, I dreamed of its voice, of its boong, again. This time, it came from the walls of my own room. I woke up at 2:13. I remember the numbers exactly. At the window, moonlight poured in like water, and hanging right outside, just barely swaying in the breeze, was a thin silver rope. A bell cord. We didn't have one. I blinked. It was gone. But the ringing stayed. Soft. Endless. Inside my skull, I pressed my hands to my ears. It did not stop. So I got out of bed. I opened the door. And I walked out toward the woods. I did not grab a coat. I did not even think to put on shoes. The grass soaked my feet as I stepped off the porch and into the open. The bell sound was still there. Not loud. Just steady. Like breathing from inside a wall. The woods were quiet. Too quiet. Even the crickets had gone still. Like they were holding their breath. I walked without needing a flashlight. The moon lit just enough to show the old trail. And somehow I knew where to step. Every few feet. I thought I saw something move just beyond the trees. A shift of white cloth. The edge of a sleeve. I did not stop. By the time I reached the chapel, the bell had gone silent. But I could still feel the echo of it inside my ribs. Like it had nested there. The rope was gone. The tower was dark. But the wooden platform at the back, where I had rung the bell, it looked occupied. I climbed the steps again. The wood groaned, softer than I remembered. And when I reached the top, I saw it, standing at the far edge of the platform, facing away, was a figure dressed in white. I froze, could not breathe. I said, "It wasn't me." The figure did not move. The wind did, and the figure's robes did not shift. It was not cloth. It was heavier than that. When I tried to speak again, the bell rang. Not from the tower, from my chest. Boong. It hurt. My bones rattled. My jaw clenched on its own. I clutched at my shirt, gasping. The sound blooming inside me like metal struck underwater. Then I felt it. A hand. Gold. Gripping my shoulder from behind. I knew if I turned around, I would see a face I would never forget. So I ran. I leapt off the platform, hit the dirt, and kept going. Branches sliced my arms. My legs gave out more than once. But I crawled, staggered, kept moving. I did not stop until I collapsed on the front porch of my house. I remember the stars spinning above me. I remember the bell stopped. Just like that. Gone. The next few days are a blur. I had a fever. My mom said I talked nonsense in my sleep. Something about names and ropes and watching eyes. Rick stopped coming around. Said he heard the bell at his house 2 nights later. Said he moved his bed to the basement. Caleb moved away that winter. His family packed up fast. No goodbye. Now I am 31. Live a few states over. Have a job. Pay taxes. Do everything you are supposed to. But if I hear a bell ring, any bell, I check my watch. And if it is past midnight, I do not answer, because sometimes I still feel it. The weight in my chest, the vibration of a name not spoken but taken, and the breath of someone standing too close behind me. Not asleep, not gone, just waiting for the next ring. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I truly mean that. If you enjoyed these stories, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. That way, you won't miss the next ones. And once again, thank you for walking this dark road with me tonight.